Thank you, Eva, for your very intriguing and important talk. And now I'm happy, it gives me a great pleasure to introduce you to my colleague Sara Offenberg from the Jewish Art Department at the Bar-Ilan University. She is the author of 2 books and published many articles in books and journals. She is co-editor of the journal Ars Judaica. Her research interests are Jewish-Christian relation in medieval art and literature, the image of the Jew in Hebrew, in art and literature, early Kabbalah, German pietist, Piyut commentary, and Hebrew illuminated prayer books. The title of her lecture today is Divide and Conquer: Deconstructing Jewishness and Reconstructing Contextual Meaning.
Thank you. Okay. My next sentence, can you hear me? Yeah. Is the most important thing I'm going to say. Yeah. Pay attention. Thank you, Lior Yacobi. Not only for what you've done in this conference, but for the endless talks about my paper today. So, way beyond your duties. Okay, now to the medieval stuff. Jews in medieval Europe encountered the aristocratic motives of the Christian milieu on a daily basis. These were expressed in Christian literature, art, theology, drama. In Hebrew illuminated manuscripts made in the 13th and 14th centuries, we find many symbols adopted from Christian society, as we heard, such as hunt scenes, royal customs, chivalric displays, etc. Artistic and textual evidence reveals imagined identities from which we learn that some Jews envisioned themselves as aristocrats and knights, despite the fact that the actuality of everyday life in medieval Europe was far from noble or chivalric, at least for most of them. In this paper, I will examine some methodological issues raised in dealing in these non-Jewish subjects of chivalric and knightly figures in Hebrew illuminated manuscripts from German lands known as Ashkenaz, and offer some reflections on the procedure of work on these images. Now, whenever I'm explaining that my current project deals with knights in Jewish manuscripts, I received the same reaction, but there were no Jewish knights. Well, it is correct. Some part. But it doesn't mean that Jews have not envisioned themselves, has not seen themselves in knightly manner, which is even common today. Yeah, I wish I knew who that person was. This was, thank God for Facebook and medievalists, because I haven't been to Kalamazoo, so yeah. That's a cool guy. Good guy, I guess. Okay. Now, let us begin with a brief explanation of the title of my work, Divide and Conquer. First, we have to isolate the non-Jewish aspects and understand them. I deconstruct the aspects of the picture only to reconstruct them again with all their contextual elements. In many Hebrew illuminated manuscripts, the iconography and style of the images are closely related to Christian art, but only in rare cases can we actually discern whether the work was done by a Jewish illuminator or a Christian one. What I suggest here is not that illuminations were necessarily done by a Jewish illuminator, obviously, but rather that the patron or a person acting on his behalf, such as the scribe, for example, directed the artist to design and illustrate the scene in a particular way. After analyzing the iconography and at times new portrayals, we turn to the meaning of the scene displayed. The relation between text and image in illuminated manuscript is important because they should be read together to understand the scene in its immediate and general context. I'm interested in the reasons that brought the Jewish patrons to order such images and to understand how they portray themselves and their surrounding neighbors. In recent years, the imagined identity of Jews who portray themselves as knights has received scholarly attention, and most recently and notably from Ivan Marcus. Marcus discussed the dissonance between actual Christian knights in the Middle Ages, whom he identifies with the Crusaders, and the fact that Jews saw themselves as knights. Warriors, especially knights, are portrayed in Ashkenazi manuscripts both in miniature paintings and in micrography, and may represent both Jewish and Christian characters. They portray characters of noble and aristocratic nature, as shown by Sara Lev-Ani. I saw her over there, yeah. And you can already recognize from the images from her research. Her focuses on illuminated manuscripts made in and around Lake Constance region in the 14th century. Symbols that were obvious social codes for medieval people but are now poorly understood can be deciphered by learning more about their actual bicultural environment, as done by Sara Lev-Ani. And obviously here I'm talking about the Zurich roll of arms and the Codex Manesse, the Christian manuscripts used also for the Jewish. Now, as opposed to popular opinion, we cannot understand the medieval world just by watching the movie A Knight's Tale, entertaining as it may be. Yeah, I love this movie. Here I am employing the same methodology I used when studying hunt scenes in Jewish art. In order to better understand these scenes, I tried to reconstruct the surrounding world of medieval Jews and try to understand the actual features of the sports of hunting. Therefore, in order to study hunt scenes, or in our case today, chivalric features in Jewish manuscripts, I first learned their meaning in Christian society, art, and literature, such as Hunt's Manual. And the most famous one was Gaston Febau's book on hunting. The same goes for knights, where you have instruction books such as Ramon Lulz, and now it's translated into English, as well as romances, some of which were written by knights and portray a more accurate picture of the knightly life and mindset, as shown by Makiko Komiya. I would now like to focus on 3 examples from Ashkenaz. I separate the knights in Hebrew manuscripts into two categories, which I fondly call good night, bad night. Let us first take a look at the bad night. In the Double Machzor, a prayer book probably made in Esslingen around 1290, we find some illuminations of nights. Let us look at folio 221, where the liturgical poem A Father Knew You From Youth, Avidah HaMinoal, for the Day of Atonement of Yom Kippur, is illuminated. The text is framed inside the arch, and on each side of the arch there's a medallion, which contains 2 charging knights, and they are both brandishing their sword. They are both dressed in full armor, while the horse trappers display the heraldic symbols as well. And we can see here the lion, also on the shield, and the imperial eagle, but here he's facing right. Yeah. I suggested the heraldic symbols on the knights incorporate both symbols of Rudolf I of Habsburg, King of the Holy Roman Empire from 1273 and ruler at the time this manuscript was produced, as he died a year later in 1291. And we also see the symbols on his statues from Speyer Cathedral and just 3 weeks ago, exactly 3 weeks ago, Professor Weber and myself went to Speyer just to pay a visit to Rudolf. Yeah, Rudy. Okay. During the reign of Rudolf I, the legal status of the Jews deteriorated, and they were limited in where they were allowed to live. Rudolf I even banned them from leaving some cities, and the possession of any Jew who tried to leave Germany were seized and added to Rudolf's treasury. The most infamous incident connected to Rudolf I is the capture and imprisonment of the great Rabbi Maharam of Rothenburg in 1286, where he died in 1293, when he attempted to leave Germany. Note that the scene illustrates a liturgical poem, a piyut, for the Day of Atonement, and elsewhere I refer to Jewish-Christian polemics in illustrated scenes for this holiday, and the elements of awe and fear in illuminations created for the high holidays. The eagle, here, the eagle may represent the threat of the Holy Roman Empire, which combined with the lion forms the symbols of Rudolf I, making the knights in this scene the bad guys. An example of a good knight is found in a micrography of a knight in an Ashkenazi Bible made in the second half of the 13th century, where the knight's Jewish identity is clear. The page contains the final verses from Isaiah and the opening of Ezekiel. The Masorah micrography contains 2 portrayals of the 4 creatures from Ezekiel's vision. The Masorah on the lower margins forms the rectangular frame that contains the full bodies of the creatures, which also portray upstairs from Ezekiel's vision in this order. A lion on the right faces the ox, and that represents also some sort of peace in the heavens and on earth. And here the knight faces the eagle with spread wings. In the context of the combination of Isaiah and Ezekiel with the images of the creatures portrayed, the whole page settings represents the throne of God. Most portrayals of the 4 creatures in Jewish art follow Christian convention of displaying the creatures with wings, usually making the human figure appear as an angel. As I suggested elsewhere, the choice to portray the human figure in full armor and as a knight can be explained by the tradition of Jacob's image engraved upon the throne based on Ezekiel's vision that identifies the human figure as Jacob. This notion is rooted in the Aramaic translation of Genesis 28:12 of Jacob's dream, where the angels climb up the ladder to view Jacob's image engraved upon the throne. The knight in this micrography may illustrate the verse Abir Yaakov, meaning Jacob's guardian knight or Jacob knight. An illumination of Jacob engraved upon the throne is illustrated in the Leipzig Machzor, mentioned earlier, made in Worms around 1310, studied by Katrin Kochman-Appel. Jacob is represented by the human figure as one of the 4 creatures that illustrates the initial panel of the Piyut El Mitnaseh, or the Tractate Shkalim. According to Kochman-Appel, the image reflects the ideas of the mystical ideas in the writings of Hasidei Ashkenaz, the German pietists, especially those of Rabbi Elazar of Worms, about the vision of the human figure of Jacob engraved upon the throne. In the Leipzig Machzor, the human figure can be interpreted as representing the image of Jacob. But the scribe of the Bible micrography went even further by portraying Jacob according to the verse that describes him in the biblical passages, representing him as Jacob the knight. And this Shabbat, we read the portion of the Haftarah from Isaiah, where Abir Yaakov is mentioned, Jacob, the night, or Jacob's night. Although the idea of Jacob's image engraved upon the throne has well been known since the rabbinic period, the association between that topos and the phrase Abir Yaakov first appeared in the 13th century in the writings of Rabbi Elazar of Worms, connected Abir Yaakov with the image of Jacob on the throne. As this micrography decoration appears in the Bible and there are no other texts within it, it is hard to pin down the particular verses that the designer had in mind when planning the image. However, in considering the intellectual atmosphere at the time and place this manuscript was produced, we can conclude that this portrayal visualizes concepts of Hasidei Ashkenaz. In a recent article, Annette Weber discussed ideas of Hasidei Ashkenaz in the micrography of Ashkenazi Hebrew Bibles, and it's in the recent issue of Ars Judaica. I'm not biased at all, I'm just one of the editors. You can buy it outside. Yeah, so, promotion. No, but for the point, Annette Weber already showed that the ideas of Hasidei Ashkenaz already appear in the micrography of Ashkenazi Bibles. In Rabbi Chaim Paltiel's commentary on the Torah, written around the year 1300, and based on the writings of the Tosafists, as well as Rabbi Judah the Pious and his student Rabbi Elazar of Worms, we find Jacob the Knight in his commentary on Genesis. And I quote, "By the hands of the mighty one of Jacob," meaning, who caused him all this might and honor? It is Abir Yaakov, that is Jacob, the hero or the champion. Here we find the knight identified as Jacob in full armor. In referring to the armor of the knight or the social rank of a person, we should remember that in the aristocratic society there were different statuses. Hence, in order to understand what makes this knight different, we have to take a closer look. He is dressed in a surcoat, a sleeveless garment worn over a chain of mail of the Hubark type. If you can see it, you can see my necklace. It's pretty much the closest thing to that. Yeah. I haven't thought of that. Okay. The knight wears a great helm. That's important. It covers the entire face except for the eyes and was used mainly by the more noble knights, such as the cavalry and not the infantry soldiers. On the helmet, there is a round object with two crescents. Okay, that's the helm, which is called the great helm, and the crescent. And according to Charles Ashdown, the great crest, such as the one in our image, were used for this, from the second half of the 13th century onwards, and never in actual battle, being reserved exclusively for tournaments purposes. As opposed to warriors engaged in combat or crusaders, where they could gain their knighthood regardless of their social status, the participants in the tournaments were all knights of noble status. This could be one of the reasons for choosing to portray the knight in the Jewish manuscript as a tournament participant, since doing so hints at his aristocratic position. Evidence for Jewish knowledge of the tournament is found both in text and in visual culture. In one of the responses of the Ravia, already mentioned earlier, he responds to a quarrel regarding a collateral for a set of chainmail sold after its Jewish owner returned from the tournament. This is described as a normative place to visit and a normative object for Jews to obtain, and we can conclude that Jews were familiar with tournament apparel. In his left hand, the knight holds a rectangular object, which might be a shield, but it is too small. A shield of this kind should be a round one and not rectangular. And with his horizontal lines, it looks like some sort of a book or a writing tablet. In the scene from the Leipzig Machzor, Jacob is holding a book, which characterizes him as a scholar. In the micrography, we may assume that something similar is portrayed, although its abstract form makes it difficult to identify. It does resemble a horn book, and here I want to thank Ilya Rodov for this idea. Perhaps he's holding a horn book. In his right hand, the knight is holding a long mace, probably the type known as the Gothic mace. Why was this particular weapon chosen and not, say, a sword or an axe? This was a popular weapon of war and a secondary weapon in tournaments. The mace was the weapon of militant churchmen who sought to avoid the denunciation of those who smite with the sword. And from the 12th century onwards, it was also used as a symbol of authority. And the most familiar one is the example of the Bishop Odon from the Bayeux tapestry. That's him with a mace, as opposed to the other warriors. Okay, from 1077. Jacob is also identified in Jewish sources in reference to authority, and the rod, the staff, is often associated with Jacob in written sources based on 2 verses in Genesis. Hence, the so-called ceremonial mace or staff in this micrography decoration could relate to these verses as portraying both the mace and the staff, both the rod of authority and a weapon, and thus reinforce Jacob's image as an authoritative character of higher rank than the other creatures here from Ezekiel. Hence, by analyzing the details of this image, we reveal the intentional, heroic, and noble portrait of this Jewish knight. Now I would like to look at an illumination from the Michael Machzor, which Eva Fromovich already studied, also, produced in Ashkenaz in 1258. The piyut Adir Dar Metuchim for Shabbat HaGadol, the great Shabbat, the Shabbats before Passover, is illuminated by a knight charging with his sword before a white horse. At first glance, there is no apparent reason for this image, but when reading the piyut, we encounter the word daharat, meaning galloping. This word is paraphrased after Judges 5:22. Then the horse's hoofs pounded as headlongs galloped the steed, or in Hebrew, midaharot daharot abirav, meaning knights. The biblical source is not enough to explain why the patron would be interested in an image based on a single word of a very long piyut that mostly concerns the Passover dishes. It's about the Agalat Kilim, it's about which dishes and how you can manage them before Passover. It's extremely long. Here we turn to the piyut commentary, where we have 13 remaining manuscripts from Ashkenaz and 1 more from France, which contain exegesis on this piyut. According to Elizabeth Hollander, the need for piyut commentary emerged from the difficulty of understanding words and phrases in the piyutim, and some were written on separate manuscripts and not as part of the Machzor. In most manuscripts, there is an elaborated explanation on the word daharat, which includes the biblical quotation and comments that the abirim are abirei Israel, i.e. the knights of Israel who are galloping with each other. And here's an example from the tripartite Machzor, also very well known from Sari Chalev's Eini research. And that's part of the piyut, that's the word here, the daharat, and here's the commentary on it. And that's what is related here. Hence, the knight and horse can be explained only by, that's the first explanation, not the meaning, just why they are it's appearing here. It's a plural here, can be explained only by reading the text and deeper research of the iconography. By applying the aforementioned methodologies, i.e., by studying the texts and images together and in relation to Christian milieu, we can reach a deeper understanding of the original purpose for ordering these illuminations and better reconstructing this Jewish art.